So today we're going to talk about yoga history and timeline and yeah, kind of where we are today with yoga and where it came from. And we see such a vast difference of the roots of yoga to what we call yoga today in the modern world. So I think it's fascinating to be able to retroactively go back and be like, let's remember what the essence of this practice is about and where it came from. So I'm going to go through the history, and then at some point I'll open it up for any questions. And yeah, we'll work on this flow together. So let's go all the way back to 3800 BC. So 3800 BC, we see the first documented postures. And the postures that they're referring to are postures like this. Exactly how we're sitting now. Cross-legged position, spine tall and erect, eyes usually closed down. And so this vision or this symbol on the outside lets us know that there was something going on where there was an internal reflective piece or practice that was happening. So they saw many statues in caves depicted in a lotus position. And this was in northern India where they found these postures in the caves there. So we know that from noticing that, we know that some practice exists of inward reflection and inward inquiry. Okay, so that was 3800 BC. Then fast forward, we move to 1700 BC, and we start to see the first documented scriptures. So the first documented scriptures, when finally something was written down, there was 4 books. And one of the oldest books was known as the Rig Veda. So it's the earliest scripture. And it basically has its roots or its foundation in religion, right? So religion of Hinduism, Buddhism, and when we think back or we look at the word religion itself, it comes from the Latin word relega. And relega means to reunite. And so we think about yoga, we're thinking about the joining, the uniting, right? Yoga used to yoke, to bring back together. So in that way, I mean, some people think that religion and spirituality is different, but really it's like, what is the practice? What is the point of the practice? Well, it's to bring us back together, take what's separate and recognize its wholeness again. So it's a unification process. So this is what's happening in the Rig Veda. So we have yoga, which is basically the science of all religions. So if relega is to unite, then yoga is not interested in how you really do that. They're just interested in the main purpose of joining back together. So it's a reunion to ourselves. It's a remembering. From there, also we see a civilization that's very founded in ritual. So we see this joining also shamanic practices, which is all about ritual and ceremony and connecting with the elements and the earth. And we see that at the roots of yoga as well in the Rig Veda. So it's about ceremony. And this is from the very beginning how we see that yoga and shamanism, there's so many similarities, and they have quite a complementary relationship to one another, because we're allowing ourselves to go out to gain more clarity through connecting with nature and connecting with ourselves and the land through ceremony. So daily rituals, daily mantras, and the purpose of that is to connect back with the natural world. And that's why you see a lot of yogis or sadhus that they go into the mountains and they find refuge there and they go into isolation. And from a lot of the information that came to people through yoga, they say was from the cosmos, was from the stars. So when they enter into that isolation and they don't have other distractions around them, they're able to listen and they're hearing the natural world outside of them and they're getting downloaded messages. And that was shared orally for a very, very long time until eventually someone, a student, wanted to write it all down, right? Or many students. So that's 1700 BC. And while that was going on with the Vedas, which mean knowledge or wisdom, in 1700 BC to 1800 BC, we have the Upanishads. So we'll be looking at the Upanishads after we look at the sutras, but there's over 200 Upanishads, okay, and 12 main ones that they call slokas. 12 main ones. And they're basically poetic songs and scriptures that were written to help understand Advaita Vedanta philosophy, which was about oneness, right? So when we talk about uniting things together, we're saying, here we are in a dualistic world, in a dualistic experience, and we're joining together to find oneness. Where did that come from? So even though we're living in a materialistic world where we experience duality, light and dark, hot and cold, male, female, whatever it is, we know that it all came from the one source. So this Vedanta philosophy is referring to the end of knowledge. So it's about that micro cosmic, macro cosmic experience. And even though we're living a dualistic life, the theory behind it is that we all come from one, right? So that's like the major understanding of yoga philosophy through Advaita Vedanta. So, and Upanishads is around sitting at the feet of the teacher, sitting at the feet of the master. So it was about truth, it was about direct wisdom, and it's about the concept of Brahman. So Brahman is that universal consciousness. So we have the terms Brahman, and then we have Atman, which is the individual soul. So Brahman is universal consciousness. Atman is the individual soul that experiences universal consciousness. And when we bring those two together, we're basically merging back into Brahman, right? But we, us here, individuals, we experience Atman, right? But they're both have the ability to find that elevated consciousness. Okay. So that concept of Brahman is basically oneness, which is the product of the highest human wisdom. Then we move to 600 BC. 600 BC is we see finally the word and the definition of yoga. So yoga was never talked about before that moment. And that's the union with Brahma. So that's the first time that we see it written down, yoga, 600 BC. Then 500 BC, we have what's the text, a very famous text known as the Bhagavad Gita, which is part of a larger text called the Mahabharata. So the Bhagavad Gita is referring to the Song of the Lord. And the Song of the Lord, we have a few characters, Arjuna and Krishna. Arjuna learns from Krishna the lessons of life. Right? So it's set on a battlefield. Okay, the Bhagavad Gita is set on a battlefield, and it's basically, do you need me to stop? Okay. I didn't know. So it's referring to, yeah, okay. Let's just pause. That's what's going on. You're getting your coffee. It's okay. Thank you. Yeah, no worries. So 500 BC, I'll start over. 500 BC, the Bhagavad Gita, part of a greater book of the Mahabharata, known as the Song of the Lord, depicted on a battlefield that Arjuna and Krishna are in conversation basically the whole time, trying to understand the fluctuation and the battles of the mind. So that's the reason why it's depicted outside in a battlefield, because it's basically a metaphor to the battle that's going on internally at all times, right? And then what is our dharma? What is our purpose? What is our action in life that we need to take, even though it may be fighting your family, for example, on the battlefield? It's like we have to, no matter what, listen to our dharma and move in that direction, right? So we see the relationship of karma yoga, which can be the yoga of action. And it basically references how we show up in the world, right? So it shows how people can be in the world rather than renounce, which is what people had done before. They would go up into the Himalayas and they would renounce, and they would walk around with their little beggar's bowl and they wouldn't really need anything, and they would just sit in meditation, in contentness, and they would receive the wisdom, the ancient wisdom that was around them from the natural world. But this now is saying, okay, now we're in a human body, we're experiencing duality, we have a body, we have a mind. Now, how do we work with it all? And underneath it all is our purpose in life. And how do we move towards our purpose? So this is what the Bhagavad Gita is about. And it's pretty much one of the most revered scriptures in northern India. 300 BC is when we start to see Siddhartha, right? Buddhism. And this was not a new thing that was created. I mean, what the Buddha talks about was very similar to what Jesus Christ, what Christianity was talking about, right? But we see that as Buddhism, like this new path of like yogis kind of falling into wanting to study and sit and understand the Buddhist lineage and philosophy, rather than getting tied to this idea that religion was supposed to guide you there. So we started kind of separating here a little bit religion and spirituality, even though, as we know from before, they're not really separate. Right? But it makes us feel comfortable and good to divide things and say, I'll take this and put it over here and this and put it over there. It helps our mind to understand what it is that's going on. But really, like we talked about before, it's about that joining and that remembering and uniting. Okay, so that was 300 BC. Then we move to 200 CE, and that's where we start to see the Yoga Sutras. So the Yoga Sutras are about 2,000 years old. This is the Raja path of yoga. It's known as the royal path, Raja meaning king. And it's a step-by-step approach to enlightenment, essentially. So we do this, 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 and this, and then we receive this. So it's a path that requires discipline and understanding and practice, right? Discipline and practice. And it's basically trying to understand the psychology of the mind. So in the first 3 sutras, they say, we tell you everything you need to know, And we assume you don't understand. So we go on for another 193 sutras to help clarify what we mean in the first three. And you see that in 1.2, Yoga's Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Yoga is the stilling of the pattern of consciousness in the mind, stilling of the thoughts of the mind. So how do we do that? And then the sutras goes on to describe that. So there's also 4 books in the Yoga Sutras. The aim of yoga, the practices of yoga, the benefits from doing the practices of yoga, and then liberation. Right? And those books are called padas, Pada. So this is where we also start to see Samkhya, so evolution of nature, Purusha, Prakriti. So Purusha is pure spirit and Prakriti is matter. So now we're looking at this Samkhya philosophy of a dualistic approach to life, to helping us to understand how to work with the mind, how to work with the body, rather than just seeing everything as oneness, because it can be hard living in a body and having a mind. You can theoretically understand oneness, but it's kind of hard, right? It's like, yes, we're all one, but also I'm having my own individual experience in my own body with my mind. So talking about a dualistic philosophy as well helps us to come back to the oneness, right? From one thing comes two things, from two things comes many things. So it's all stemmed from that oneness experience that we see in the Upanishads. 300 CE, we move into a new era, and this is where Tantra starts to arise again. For so long, it was really, Tantra was hidden, right? It was practiced underground. So 500 CE to 1300 CE is really when it started to bloom. And we have more of the embracing and the encompassing of the householder. So this is the yoga for, we have to remember too that back in the day, yoga was really available only to the highest class system, which is the Brahmin class. And so we're really starting to say, okay, how can we bring this into the household for women, for example, or for people who weren't in that highest caste system? So it was practiced underground for a really long time. And for this, it's the focus on the goddess. It's the focus on life being play, right? Creativity. And then we see that Shiva and Shakti energy manifest from that. And so we see the body as not something that we want to say, oh, you're not the body, you're not the mind. It's like, yes, you are the body, and how can you experience consciousness through the body? So we have Hatha Yoga for that. We have Kundalini practices for that. And we have this Shiva Shakti balance, where Shiva is pure awareness. It's pure consciousness. It's the container that Shakti, which is pure potential. It's your divine experience and divine Leela. It's that inner play, that dance of life. And that's your Shakti. And that can only happen if you have someone, Shiva, holding that space, right? So you have the balance of structure, and then Shakti becomes the flow and the dance within that structure. Okay, moving on to 700 CE, we have Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya is someone who came and reignited the flame and dived into specifically the scriptures. So the ancient texts, the Upanishads, the Ramayana, the Yoga Sutras. And this is also coming back to the idea of oneness, non-duality, Advaita Vedanta. So he was a big teacher in that oneness phase. He also opened 10 ashrams in India, Shankaracharya. And he has a really famous book. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of it, but it's called Crest Jewel of Wisdom. And if you haven't picked it up, you might want to. It's a really good one. And so his whole thing was like, we're not separate. Okay. No separate self. There's inquiry and there's teachings of the Upanishads that he really welcomes in, because that explains the oneness philosophy of non-dualism. And he firmly reestablished this non-dual philosophy. So it was there in the beginning with the Upanishads and where everything came from the one. But then we started exploring Tantra and Buddhism and Yoga Sutras. And so we were kind of getting more into, okay, how do I work with this body, this mind, this dualistic experience? And so Shankaracharya came back and was like, hey, remember where we came from, right? Remember, this is about oneness. So he firmly reestablished that. So yoga after that was really starting to be viewed through that lens again. We have 1000 CE, which is the Bhakti era, not error. So the major guy here is Sri Chaitanya Brahman. So this is from the Brahmin caste. It's the Brahmin caste, again, is like that high royal caste system. It's like a priest lineage. So these teachings were in secret, basically, and only available for a small number of people. So this was about the upkeep. Bhakti was about the upkeep of the temple. So as we know, the path of Bhakti Yoga is about devotion. And so we would see that here in Bhakti, there was knowledge of the Vedas, because back then in the Vedas, it was all about, remember, ritual and mantra. So this is where we start to see more mantra coming in. This is where we start to hear people on the streets chanting Hare Krishna. And if you've ever been around the Hare Krishnas, you know their main motto is chant Hare Krishna and be happy. And that's all you have to do. They say the path of Bhakti Yoga is the easiest and fastest path to enlightenment. It's easy to just start a chant if we let go of all that mental capacity of like, oh, I can't sing, I don't know what these words mean, I'm not going to chant in another language, I don't believe in this, I feel like it's a religion. These are all the things that come up in Bhakti Yoga. And the reality is that actually what it's asking you to do is surrender fully and to trust and to be in the experience fully. And you'll notice is like the moment when all of those mental fluctuations go away and you can access that heart space, then the feelings become overwhelming. I can't tell you how many times I was sitting and singing and started to just lose it. Okay, so this is the Bhakti era. And it really revolutionized India. It gave India like a new heart, right? Because everyone was starting to chant and their energies were shifting, and they became lighter and more joyful and in touch with their emotions. And they worshiped to like that surrender of something greater than themselves. They didn't know what was going on, but they felt it, and it was true to their heart. So it was a devotional era there in India. And there are many, many different deities that people pray to in India, but the reality is that it all comes from the one. So if we know about Trimurti, if we know about the Hindu Trinity, we know that there are three energies that manifest on earth, and that is creation, what sustains, and then destruction. And so we see that in Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So Brahma is the creation, right? That's the one. Vishnu is the sustaining energy. And then Shiva is the destructive or death. So we have life, we live our life, or birth, we live our life, and then we have death. So from Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, we actually have lots of other deities, right? So we've been singing to Ganesh the last couple of days. And Ganesh is part of the Shiva lineage. So if you think about what Ganesh does, is the removing of obstacles. And when you remove something, you're basically dying to something so that something else can be reborn. In 1400 CE, we see the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which hopefully you've heard of before. And this is the first text we see outlined of certain practices. So not just ritual and ceremony now or philosophy around oneness or duality, but we see asana postures, we see mudras, we see kriyas, we see pranayama. And this is basically remembering too that yoga was not about, triangle pose or handstand or extended side angle. It was around meditation. It was about shifting states of awareness. And so we have to remember that at the root of every class that we're even teaching is like that meditation, that internal reflection is key. That inner inquiry becomes key. So Hatha Yoga Pradipika basically has 16 postures that we see, and they're all variations of Padmasana. They're all variations of lotus, so that we can prepare our body to sit. Same with the sutras. Even in the 8 limbs, it references asana as being one of the limbs. But that asana is just this, Sthira Sukham Asana. So it wasn't all of the fancy poses that we see today. That's actually a very modern part of yoga, which we'll get to in a little bit. So Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And this was variations of lotus to help sit for meditation. And it was also cleansing and purifying practices to clear the body of toxins, clear the mind of fluctuating thoughts. And through these practices and discipline of these practice and regulation of these practice, we're able to sit with a more clear channel. And when we are clear, that's when that internal wisdom and messages start to arise. Okay. And Hatha Yoga Pradipika was stemmed from the Tantra era from before, right? From 300 CE. So now it's like, okay, we have this body. Now, how are we going to work with this body to cleanse, purify, clean, and clear so that we can experience the oneness? Right? In the 1830s, we have Transcendentalism. So you might have heard this, very popular from the Beatles and their teacher, which was Maharishi. And it's basically Transcendentalism in the West was influenced by certain texts. So it's about supreme consciousness, and the individual is the same. So again, about the oneness. So God is not something that's outside of you. It is an experience of connecting to the God within everybody. And that again is also a more embodied tantric philosophy, is like we don't need to give up anything to someone or something outside of ourselves. We have the power to heal, and to all we have to do is turn our awareness around inside. 1893 CE is Vivekananda, if you've ever heard of this name. It's a guru, basically that was his guru said, go to America and teach these people. Right? What's going on? Go there and spread the message of yoga, spread the message of love. And he was a scholar, so he created a very large following in the West. He was one of the first people to do that. And it was all about scripture and ancient wisdom and text, and it didn't involve any postures. You have to remember now it's 1893, and we still have only ever seen variations of lotus through the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Then moving on to 1920 CE, we have Yogananda. And I'm sure you've also heard of Yogananda. His book is Autobiography of a Yogi. If you haven't picked it up, also a really good one. And his message was to go to the West and teach yoga too. So now we start to see that these teachers that are coming from India, these gurus that people had, are really asking people to go and spread the message, because this is important information that people need to have because of all of the benefits, right? So he was teaching Kriya Yoga. So this was about breathing techniques, again, no postures. He also has a yoga ashram in Encinitas. I don't know if anyone's been there in San Diego. He wrote many, many songs, and really, in addition to Vivekananda, was the introduction to yoga in the West. So Vivekananda, Yogananda were some of the major influences in the West, in America, that brought the tradition from the East over. And now about 20 million people are practicing yoga in the West. So well done to those guys. Yeah. And then 1930s, so even 10 years after that, then we see Krishnamacharya. And Krishnamacharya, you may have heard, he's the father of modern yoga, basically. So the father of modern yoga, this is where we start to see postures. Now, Krishnamacharya was a doctor of the royal path in Mysore, which is in the south of India. And so he would check on, again, yoga being for the Brahmin caste. So he was a doctor to the royal family and started prescribing asanas to heal any ailment that was going on. So now we start to see the origin of yoga asana and physical dis-ease in the body, and how asanas are meant to clear those diseases. So really, it's yoga therapy, right? And this would be done in the royal house. It would also be done in hospitals. It would, just like in Thailand too, like Thai massage is done in the hospitals there. People get prescribed a certain Thai massage in order to fix the ailments that they have. So Krishnamacharya had a few students. One was his nephew called BKS Iyengar, which I'm sure you are all familiar with. And Iyengar was weak, and he was healed by basically the teachings of Krishnamacharya. And as we know in Iyengar yoga, we see a really slow form of yoga, a lot of support with prop, and a focus and emphasis on alignment. It's also a pretty strengthening and strict practice, even though it's done in a very slow and intentional, aligned way. So if you look at Krishnamacharya as like the main father of modern yoga, then you have kind of 4 branches going from Krishnamacharya. And one of those is Iyengar. The other one is his son, TKV Desikachar. And Desikachar started Vini Yoga. And his son was basically the one who started yoga therapy, right? Because it came directly from his father's lineage. Because remember, he was the doctor prescribing ailments. So his son basically followed in his footsteps there. Then on the opposite side of Iyengar, we have another one of his students, which was Pattabhi Jois. And Pattabhi Jois developed Ashtanga Vinyasa. And you still see that very well practiced in Mysore in southern India today. And Ashtanga yoga, referencing the Ashtanga being the 8 limbs. So a system of yoga that follows the 8 limbs. And it was also, this practice was starting to, it was developed for younger boys, younger Indian boys. And so it was a gymnastics style of practice with lots of vinyasas, lots of getting into a pose, 5 breaths, getting out of a pose. This is where all vinyasa flow is basically coming from, is from the teachings of Pattabhi Jois. And it was for around 13-year-old boys because they would struggle with their mental focus. So they were having ADD experiences, and in order to, so we keep them moving, and it's also, the primary series is focused on opening of the hips. Secondary series is opening the spine, more inversions and back bends, and it goes all the way through tertiary series as well. And the experience of Ashtanga is that you can't really move on to the next posture unless you've completed the one before. So someone might say to you, okay, go to closing sequence. And so basically it was a very strict gymnastic style dynamic class that's still obviously practiced today. And again, so we have like the tradition in the Indian bodies, right? That can do postures and move in that way and open their hips in that way. And then we have people now, modern day living, mostly females who have different bodies, trying to do an old traditional practice of Ashtanga. And so you see a lot of injuries start to occur. Even when I was practicing my Ashtanga in Mysore, I tore my lateral meniscus, because it can be very driven practice, very type A, could even fall into ego very easily around, hey, what posture did you get to, right? And Iyengar is actually what really helped to heal my body. So by taking it slow, by looking at alignment, by using props to support myself, I was able to come and heal my body. So finding that really like the therapeutic balancing essence that your body needs, that will help really complement and bring you into balance. So for me in my teachings, it's a mixture of the teachings of Iyengar and the teachings of Pattabhi Jois. And Krishnamacharya, as 2 of their students, said that, Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois, they studied with him for a certain period of time. And he quotes saying that they did the best that they could with the time that they had. So that makes me believe that Krishnamacharya wasn't quite a fan of them moving from his teachings of yoga therapy out into the world through a dynamic practice or even a very slow aligned prop based practice. But he says they did the best they can. And as we know as yogis too, these combinations and where yoga has taken us today, it still has the benefits that it once had before. But in some way, that tradition got lost, right? And so it makes it difficult if we're doing yoga therapy to teach group classes, because we know that everybody needs something different for their body. So we as teachers do the best that we can with the information that we have and the people that we're in front of. So that's why options become important, props become important. It's like your awareness is on the class, and you're really trying to give each person, each individual, techniques to help balance their system. And that's when it becomes therapeutic as well. Then we have Indra Devi. So Indra Devi, this is a special one. She is the first woman. She's a Latvian woman. And she's an influential kind of mother figure of yoga, who basically, I think her mother was the one that came to Krishnamacharya and begged him to take her on as a student. Because as we know before, it wasn't available not just for the Brahmin caste, but definitely not for women. So, and when we think of the 20 million people practicing yoga today, most of them are women, right? So the yoga has come such a long way. So she was influential mother. She persuaded Krishnamacharya to teach her, and she went to the States and established the first yoga studio. Right? First yoga studio. She was also a scholar, very well traveled, spoke many languages, and yeah, initiated that that channel of like having yoga available for many people, not just the Brahmin class. In around the same time of Krishnamacharya, Pattabhi Jois, Iyengar, Indra Devi, TKV Desikachar, there was also a Shivananda lineage that developed. And Shivananda was also a doctor in India. And he actually worked for the Indian Army in Malaysia. And in Malaysia, he found a sadhu, and he inspired him to go back and create more ashrams. Shivananda wrote over 100 books. Okay. So we have a couple of students that came from this Shivananda lineage, just like we have a Krishnamacharya lineage as well. The first one is Satyananda Saraswati. So Satyananda Saraswati, if you've ever heard in northern India, the Bihar University, they are a very well-known, very well-respected university in India, and it emphasizes yoga philosophy and psychology. So they have tons of courses, they have comprehensive texts on yoga, and Satyananda Saraswati, she's most famous in Australia. Okay. And they started the first introduction to yoga course, which went from like the Gurukula system of 12 years to basically the first teacher training format that was 2 months long. Right now we get to really kind of round out this yoga practices and benefits and share that in a way so that people can continue to pass on the lineage of yoga. From Satyananda Saraswati, we also have Satchit Ananda. Satchit Ananda developed Yogaville, which is located in Virginia in the United States. And so came to the West and also written many books that were later translated into many different languages. Then Vishnu Devananda. So Vishnu Devananda was responsible for the actual Shivananda ashram lineage. And so this is all over the world. You have Shivananda ashrams in the Bahamas. You have it in Rishikesh. You have, I think there's one in California as well. And it's very traditional. So it's a lot of it is about karma yoga as well. So being of service. And then there's the Shivananda lineage, was a particular sequence of yoga postures that you're just repeating every day, just like the Ashtanga lineage. Postures don't change. There was no sequencing or anything like that. It was just like, do this, and every time you do this, you'll notice your progression on the path. And there's something to be said about that, doing the same thing over and over again and being able to watch that transformation happen from the inside out. But what it also does by having that same sequence is it limits you from moving your body in other ways that are also very healthy for the system. So we see here first yoga teacher training again. This is also interesting that he made yoga pamphlets and flew in a plane, in a rainbow airplane, nonetheless, flew over in a rainbow airplane over the Berlin Wall during the war and dropped these yoga pamphlets onto the ground. You know, what a better time to explore like liberation and freedom and awareness while people are battling, right? And remember from the Bhagavad Gita as well that that war was depicted on the battlefield outside of us. So that actually happens. War happens. But that external experience that we see outside of ourselves can also be reflected from that internal battle that we face all the time, right? The last one from the Shivananda lineage is going to be Shivananda Radha. And this was a woman, again, to create the school and ashram in Canada. So we see people coming to the West, Canada, we have Australia. So all the different, we have the States. So all the different corners of the world, just little planting seeds of yoga. Also, of course, in Europe, when the plane is flying overhead and the pamphlets are falling. So spreading this yoga far and wide. So she created the school. She also established the first yoga magazine. Yeah. So before, when yoga was this male dominated society, we now see 20 million people practicing in the world, and they're mostly women. So we're seeing how yoga has changed from the tradition to the modern day experience and how it's evolving with time. And as we know, everything is always changing, right? The only constant is change itself. And so rather than sticking to a certain tradition, we can have that structure, but it's important for us to recognize how we can find adaptability within the structure, right? Seeing who's in front of us, who's practicing us, going back to the roots, like, so we can comprehend it and we can apply its practices and see if it's still beneficial, which it is, right? We all have that experience, which is why we're all here trying to share it with others. And then, of course, you know, going back to Iyengar, if you think about props, if you think about alignment base, if you think about slowness, what other lineages have stemmed from that area? Well, we see Hatha yoga, we see restorative, yin yoga, right? Whereas if we looking at Pattabhi Jois's lineage of Ashtanga Vinyasa, we see Anusara yoga, we see power yoga, all of these new kind of age, maybe more fitness oriented yoga that stem from this tradition and this lineage. But remembering that the father of modern yoga era is Krishnamacharya. So, and that is really at its roots in yoga therapy, which is what we're going to be exploring in this class, in this module, is how do we bring it back to the roots, right? So let's look at the joints, look at where we're hurting ourselves, look at where we need to rehabilitate, where we need to strengthen, where we need to stretch, and let's really use these asanas in a precise and intellectual way for healing, not only physical but emotional, mental, and spiritual pain and discomfort.